A jury in Washington, D.C. has acquitted a man who threw a Subway sandwich at a Border Patrol agent earlier this year. Is this justice for the sandwich guy or assault with a deadly salami? My guest today is going to weigh in. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture. It's not a full-size roundtable, it's just a table for two. I'm Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by Reason's very own C.J. Ciaramella. C.J., welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Always a pleasure. Are you saying we're at the kids' table?
I'm saying we're at a smaller, more intimate table so that just you and I could have a discussion about Sandwich Guy. Okay, so Sandwich Guy is an internet meme, but he's also a real person. So just start by telling us, who is Sandwich Guy? Why was he arrested and charged? And why did a jury just vote to acquit him?
All right, so to go back a little bit, you might have heard of Sandwich Guy. His real name is Sean Dunn. He was a former Justice Department paralegal. Yes, he worked at the Justice Department until on the night of August 10th, he was filmed on the streets of D.C. Yelling at some Border Patrol agents and then violently hurling a Subway sandwich at one of their chests, which bounced off of the Border Patrol's agent's chest quite dramatically, and then Dunn fled into the night while being chased by federal immigration officers. The video went viral because it was pretty humorous. There were street murals of, people throwing sandwiches, memes, all sorts of stuff. The interesting thing was that they pretty quickly located Dunn, and he was arrested for assault and disorderly conduct, but then released without charges from a local court. Where it gets interesting is then...
Why was he released without charges in that case?
Well, it's kind of, for prosecutors, they have to look at a case like that and say, all right, are we going to take an assault and disorderly conduct case to a jury for throwing a sandwich at a guy and try and make this stick? For prosecutors who have a daily caseload, they have to look at the cases they can bring and win. And the seriousness of those cases. Time is limited, resources are limited. So prosecutors every day have to make these decisions about which cases they bring and which cases they don't. So for a sort of silly case like this, maybe they just decide to let it go.
But in this silly case, he did end up in a jury trial, right?
Yes, because after that, the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C., the federal prosecutors, returned with an arrest warrant, which was executed by about 20 heavily armed riot, cops, executing a search warrant.
He's obviously a dangerous guy, right? Look at what he did on video. He threw that sandwich.
They brought out the full battle
exploded.
rattle. So yeah, they put together like a sizzle reel showing his arrest and how dramatic it was. And then tried to charge him with felony assault on law enforcement under a federal statute, which is quite a serious charge. But what happened is the grand jury they convened to try and get an indictment refused to indict Dunn on felony assault. The grand jury's deliberations weren't public, but they didn't see a felony crime in hurling a sandwich at a guy. So the feds had to go back again and refiled it as a misdemeanor assault charge on a law enforcement officer. Dunn pleaded not guilty and took it to a jury trial, which happened the first week in November. And the jury deliberated for about 7 hours after the conclusion of the trial. The feds portrayed this as if not actual injurious event, as a dangerous and sort of unhinged act that that violated this federal statute. This federal statute is for assaulting, resisting, or impeding federal law enforcement officers. Well, the defense portrayed it as, this sort of silly but ultimately harmless event. The Border Patrol officer was wearing a bulletproof vest. So they were saying, listen, there is no real way a sandwich hitting this guy in the chest could actually harm him. And the jury...
Quite explosive salami.
Yeah, they testified. Yeah,
a
yeah.
hollow point salami situation here. I mean,
The
this right. So this is part of the what's so funny about this case is you've got the testimony from the border patrol agent that the sandwich exploded all over his chest. He claimed he could smell the mustard and onions, but
yeah.
that's not what happened, right?
No, on cross-examination, they actually had a picture of the sandwich on the ground, and it was full. It was still wrapped, you know. So the at the closing arguments, the defense attorneys were like, "Listen, not only is this not a serious case, but the government can't even get his story straight. They're misrepresenting what actually the seriousness of this alleged sandwich strike. They can't even portray it correctly."
And that's something just to stop you there real quick that I want to just hit on is you cover criminal justice for a reason. This is not the only story you've written about us for us, and this is something that happens all the time. Where prosecutors, especially when you have a sort of a federal agent defendant, a police officer defendant, law enforcement defendant, they will just wildly exaggerate, and in some cases, maybe go a little bit beyond what the facts actually show in terms of how dangerous or sort of how worrisome an assault was or an event was, right? And like in this case, saying, "Oh, this is an explosive event in which, right, like it's a sandwich hitting a guy in a bulletproof vest, and we've got photo evidence that like even your description wasn't true."
Yeah, this is something that happens all the time in trials where police testify, and it happens in much more serious cases. You have, so many cases where there'll be a fatal shooting or something, and the officer will testify on the stand like, "I saw a cell phone or a wallet in that person's hand, and in that moment, I feared for my life and the life of my fellow officers, so I had to use deadly force." And the jury is forced to consider whether that is really a reasonable argument. In this case, the facts on the ground were so patently absurd that there wasn't really a question of whether or not it was a serious incident. But this is the sort of stretching and sometimes outright fabrications that police regularly employ on the stand. And we see this especially more and more in the Trump administration. They've been expanding the definition of this statute that they tried to prosecute Dunn under. This is 18 U.S. Code 111. The U.S. Attorney's Office sent me a statement on it with the code and background, and they've been using this more and more to prosecute any sort of protesters who get in the way or annoy or are filming ICE officers. They will try and charge
What does
them
the law
with this.
actually say there? What is the thing that they are? Why are they able to use that statute?
Well, they're not having a lot of success with it, but what it does say is it says whoever forcibly assaults, resists, opposes,
Right.
impedes, intimidates, or interferes with any person designated in yada yada section of this title, referring to federal law enforcement officers. NBC News just put out a story today or this week showing that about 20% of these cases they're bringing against protesters in LA are getting thrown out, just like Dunn's case. So Dunn's case is a very funny example of something that's happening all over the country with these federal prosecutions of people who are resisting or opposing or protesting the Trump administration's actions. Sometimes, with not recommended actions. Throwing a sandwich at someone is pretty childish. Janine Pirro's office put out a statement to me that said, even children know when they're angry, they're not allowed to throw objects at people, which is generally true in a polite society. We don't throw stuff at each other. But on the other hand, these same federal agents are tossing tear gas and shooting pepper balls at protesters who are engaged in peaceful First Amendment activity. So it's cutting both ways. You're seeing reactions to what appears to be a pretty unaccountable federal police force occupying American streets.
So the federal law enforcement that has been called into Washington D.C., into Portland, Chicago, other cities by Trump, that is a problem, and there's legal issues with that. It's a kind of executive overreach in a bunch of ways. At the same time, I mean, I think this is something we should just dwell on for a moment. Sean Dunn doesn't have a right to throw a sandwich at a federal agent, right? Like that's not an okay or reasonable behavior. And in fact, his statement after he came out that night, I believed I was protecting the rights of immigrants. That's absurd. Come on. I mean, this whole thing is funny, and we should laugh at it. And it is, I think, a good example of, sort of like when you look at the case and the arguments that are made of how prosecutors sort of exaggerate and hype up these cases. There's politics involved. But come on, you're going to throw a salami sandwich at a Border Patrol officer, and that's going to protect immigrants? I'm for protecting immigrants. I'm for getting CBP off of the streets of Washington, D.C. At the same time. Like, this is a dumb way to go about it.
Yeah, Dunn's defense and his own statements tried to paint this as a sort of very noble form of civil disobedience when it was pretty clearly in the video kind of him throwing a tantrum on the street. But yeah, it's not this sort of civil disobedience we find lawful or generally productive.
Like, I get it. I don't like these ICE raids either, but you can't go around throwing sandwiches. It was probably the right call for the jury to let him off, especially given the ridiculousness of the case here. At the same time, you just like an assault like this on the street, and that is what it is. It is like, yes, I don't know that it's it's a kind of assault when you're throwing something, right? This is physical contact. Like, that's not something that you want to just sort of say, well, that's okay. We want to go ahead and bless that. We want to do that. Like, this is just dumb on all sides. But the prosecution, they overreached, and I think that, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that the jury actually made this decision in part because of the prosecution hyping this case too much. CNN reported that one juror said that after the verdict, she didn't think the officer felt threatened by the sandwich and laughed when asked if she felt the sub exploded, as the officer claimed. When you say stuff like that, you're showing that you don't have a case here, and I think that's what happened. CJ, thank you so much for joining me today on Table for Two. Thank you all for watching. For more bonus segments like this one, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check back regularly. If you'd like us to answer a question on Table for Two, as we sometimes do, you can send your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long actual question to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, CJ. We will see you all soon.